All right. Hello and welcome to our organizational spotlight on Den Food Bosch, which is an experimental food forest in the southern Netherlands. I am super excited today to have here Marente. Marente? Am I saying it right? Marente? Who will
Yes.
tell us all about it. So could you please very briefly introduce yourself? Where are you joining us from? And what is your role within your organization?
Thanks, Gabby, for inviting me and for hosting this nice session about the food forest. My name is Marente Lokin, indeed. I'm from the Netherlands. Currently, I'm in Eindhoven, which is not too far from the food forest. I'm in my boyfriend's room. The lighting is a bit bad here.
Okay.
Um, and I work for a University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. So I'm a teacher and a researcher on regenerative agriculture and agroforestry and food forestry. Yeah, as two forms of regenerative agriculture. But in the food forest, I'm not doing this really for my work. It's on the side, so it's really a combination of things that I do.
That's super cool. And then Food Boss, what is it? What is your vision and how did this little collective start?
Well, it started off in 2017 with as a graduation project of one of the students from the school where I work now, actually. I didn't work there at the time, but one of the students was graduating, and as a graduation thesis, she wrote a food forest design project thesis. Um, and eventually she loved it so much that she wanted to really do it, like implement it. And that's what happened. And so together with a group of super enthusiastic students, they founded the place. They founded a foundation to organize the whole food forest and the management. And they also planted the trees, obviously. So that's where it started. And these students got inspired by their internships in Brazil, which they did at Ernst Gutsch. He is the founder of the concept of syntropic food forestry or syntropic agriculture. But I can tell a little bit more about it later.
I'm really excited to hear more about it because my next question was, can you tell us more about what a food forest is?
Yeah, and maybe I also use a picture to demonstrate it a little bit. So a food forest is somewhere on the line between annual agriculture, as we know it in most places in the world, and a forest, like we also know it, like a natural forest. And as you can see, it's more on the left side. So it's what you do in a food forest is you try to mimic the edges of the forest, which is usually the most productive part of a forest because there's much sunlight interception, and there's place for many, many different trees, many different layers of trees to grow. So it's usually very productive. And you have all kinds of different versions of agriculture in between. So from the annual crop production that we know, like corn, like wheat, or working with animals, we also have mixed versions. So cows that are walking under trees, for example. We have strip cropping, and more on the side of a natural forest is the food forest. So we really combine natural values and biodiversity with productivity and food production.
That sounds super interesting. And how does it look like in real life? Because now we see this sliding scale, but how does it, yeah, do you have any photos from your project and how does it look like maybe through the years?
Of course, it's nice to first to take a look at how it used to look like before it was planted, because the plot where it was planted was used to be a maize field, so it was just used for maize production to feed cows. In the Netherlands, we have many cows. We have many fields of maize, which is not for human consumption, but it's just for cattle. Um, yeah, maize and grass. That's really the landscape of the Netherlands. So we see also on this left picture, we still see the small leftovers of the maize plants from last year. And directly into this field, the trees were planted. And we see here on the picture on the right, already the nice tree rows appearing. Much mulch material was used. We see the wood chips over here covering a thick layer of wood chips covering the soil to hold the moisture in the right place and to feed the soil life, because that's where it all starts, obviously. For a healthy forest system, we need a healthy soil. And as you can imagine, this soil on the left side was well, really intensely used by this annual agriculture. So we use large machines. We have some compaction of the soil, obviously, because the heavy machines entering the soil all the time. We have plowing, so the soil is turned around every year, so which is not beneficial for soil life, obviously. And there was nothing to eat really for soil animals. So that's one of the first things that we did, was cover the tree rows in a thick layer of wood chips to feed soil life, to hold moisture, to really have a healthy soil and a healthy cropping system. And also we can see very nicely the straight lines of the maize on the left side, and we see the more organic, the more dynamic lines of the food forest on the right side, which is also, they're facing the sun. It's also an efficient way of catching the sun or harvesting the sun, so to say. But obviously it also looks very lovely.
It's quite a challenge to revitalize the soil after having corn production for so many years, I can imagine.
Yeah, it is. And obviously it also regenerates itself. When you do nothing, also soil life will come back. But these wood chips are really a way of speeding up that process, because that's what we really want to do. We want to follow the natural succession, so the natural how a forest develops itself. But we also, because we're a bit impatient, obviously, we'd like to speed up the process. So we give it a boost. We would like to give it some food, a boost to grow healthy and strong a bit faster.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about the using curved lines to follow the path of the sun to just have it more efficiently catch all the warmth and the sunlight. Can you talk a little bit more about the design of the food forest? Because I saw on your website it looked very impressive and very interesting.
Yeah, so what we did is it's quite a rational design. So we used straight lines and many paths. So it's easy to follow the paths. It's easy to find the trees that you're looking for. Although it can be quite a walk because we have to cover some distance. But the whole plot is very small. It's less than 1 hectare. So it's really a tiny, tiny food forest. It's really like a demonstration function and a trial if we can do this also in temperate climates. But what we see in the design is indeed the lines facing the sun. So they're really designed this way because the south is on this side. So we have north at the top of the screen, we have south on the bottom of the screen. It means the sun is coming up. The sun rises on the right side. It goes all the way around the food forest. I don't know if you can see my arrow. And the sun sets on the left side. So what we have those arms really catching the sun, so to say. So every plant that's in the system, every plant that's planted, it has some sun on some time of the day. It never has full sun the full day. It never has full shade the full day. But it's always a little bit balanced, which is very nice actually for fruit trees, because they would like to be in a foresty situation where they never have full sunlight the whole day long. It's not really beneficial for trees, especially when they're a bit younger. So this is a nice way of working also with nature, collaborating with nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Please continue.
Yeah, so one of the things that's also nice is we know that in food forests we make efficient use of the space. So when we look back to the maize fields, here, we see that all these plants are planted directly next to each other and really taking the same space. So they're competing for the same resources, for the same sunlight and for the same nutrients underground. A food forest has obviously the different layers. So the trees and the top, they can catch the full sunlight, but the trees below, they also have some, and the leftover sunlight is used by the plants all the way on the floor of the food forest. Under the ground, the same thing happens. Some plants root deeper, some plants root really shallow, and they use different resources, different water levels, different nutrients, which is quite efficient. But what we do in designing food forests, we do not only take into account that diversity in space, but we also like to make use of the time in an efficient way. And I'd like to demonstrate it by showing you what the design is supposed to look like 20 years after we planted it. And as you can see, the number of rows declined. So there's only 6 rows left of what used to be 12. So here we have the orange rows also in between. So what happens is that this is what it looked like 5 years after we planted it. So that's what it looks like now, more or less, because we're 6 years down the road. And we have much more space because the trees are not as big yet. And we use that space to grow climbing trees. So we have some vines and some structures where they can climb. And after the trees grow much bigger, so the green rows start to grow and grow and grow and produce more shade, then eventually the orange rows will disappear. But in the meantime, so in these 20 years, we use that space very efficiently by growing grapes and kiwis, for example. So this is a way of not only using space as an important factor in the design, but also time. It's very important.
It's got kind of a paradigm shift to those who are maybe doing some planting work. You usually think of like spacing and how apart you should place the plants for them to have enough like reach, but this is a different way of looking ahead also. This is really interesting.
Indeed. Yeah, that you say it just right, because for example, the sweet chestnut that we see in the top left corner, after 20 years, it's a huge tree. I mean, we can harvest and it starts to produce, or it starts to generate a lot of shade. But in the meantime, before we get there, we can use all the space around the tree to grow berries or other shrubs or herbs even that need much more sunlight. And after 20 years, a berry shrub will also be a little bit more at the end of its life cycle, and then it can pass over to the chestnut production. So it is a paradigm shift, because we are used to we are not used to taking into account these long-term processes. It can be very hard for people to think like this, to think in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and in food forest lifetime, we're even talking about hundreds of years. So we won't even be there at the end anymore. So it can be so hard for people indeed.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see how the surrounding of the chestnut looks like in 100 years, because I can imagine that even planting those shrubs and like berries also helps to regenerate the soil and provide some different nutrients that maybe chestnut might not need right now, but other plants that will take over in 15 years.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Because those plants, they drop their leaves, they feed the soil, they make their roots into the soil. So it's beneficial anyway. Yeah, but let's go back, Gabby. Maybe not in 100 years, but maybe we will manage in 60 or something. Should we do that? See what the chestnut looks like.
I think so. I think we should do that. That'd be fun.
So maybe it's also nice to see this. So this is the theory, this is the design, but in practice it looks like this. So that picture was taken in 2018. Directly after planting, we really see the thick layer of wood chips covered all the way in the middle, but we also see the cover crops. We see the green lines of cover crops. It's a green manure. It's all different kinds of plants, clovers, but also different kinds of grasses. They're also there because obviously trees need growing time. But herbs, they don't really, in one season, they can produce a lot of biomass. And that's exactly what we use it for. So in this syntropic system, we like to prune a lot. So really a lot of branches are pruned. So we really boost the growth of the tree. But also we harvest the biomass. And that's what we also do with the cover crops. So we mow them from the first year, starting from the first year already, to use that biomass to feed the soil again, to boost plant growth, to really harvest all the energy that's coming out of this system. 2 years later, this picture is a bit worse, but after 2 years, it already starts to look a lot greener. We even see some trees developing, really growing. The wood chips start to decompose, to be a part of the soil life, and more herbs are growing everywhere. We also see all the wild plants on the ground level of the food forest taking over. And then this picture was taken last year in October. So this was 5 years after planting. We see a very nice, almost bluish line of willows on the north side of the forest, and also on the south side we have a windbreak of willows, beautiful colors. And we see lots of trees, really start to develop. They are visible from the sky. It's really becoming a little bit like a young forest. And also the look and feel is like this. So when you walk through it, trees are up to 10, 12 meters high, and it really starts to feel like you're walking through a forest. So it's really amazing what nature can do. In 5 years' time, it's became from a flat piece of land, which was just bare soil, to a very biodiverse, very energetic, dynamic system.
That's really beautiful to see and super impressive how fast, yeah, how you said it so right, how fast the trees can take up all the nutrients that you just provide to them by working together with nature and noticing what works on the soil and what doesn't. That's really, really cool. And this all looks really, really impressive. I'm just wondering, how do you manage all of it? Do you have a team, or is just a couple of scientists working on it? Because I feel like you mentioned a lot of pruning. So how does that?
Yeah, indeed. So it means we have to go out there and work. But we also do a lot of research, but the daily management is done by a team of volunteers. Well, it's just some pictures. The team is much bigger. We have 8 people working there now every Friday morning. So just 3 hours on a Friday morning, which is not too much, but with many people, you can do lots of work. The work that we do, it's mostly pruning. Because if we just need to, if we don't prune, then it would just be like a birch forest or something. So we really have to keep pruning to feed soil life, but also to make space for the trees that we want to harvest from. And it's also fun. It's fun to prune because it's much nicer to be there and to be a part of this system and to actively work there instead of just waiting and not being part of nature and just fencing it and waiting until it's old enough for us to harvest. So it's really nice to be actively engaged and involved in the food forest. And working with volunteers is always a pleasure because everybody comes with their own talents, with their own ideas on how to manage this. Of course, there's so much to be learned, not only about plants and trees, but also about the management, about how to approach things, about negotiation, about what we would like to do, how we'd like to develop further. So it's super inspiring, and we have a nice and diverse team with many people joining us. So we're always happy to be there on Fridays.
That's super cool. And the people who come to join they're from like the local surroundings or your academic background, or?
No, not at all. So we have just one rule, and that's that you should be able to come to the food forest by bike.
Oh,
The
nice.
cars. So just because that makes sense. I mean, there's also people coming from far away and they're so inspired and they say, "Oh my God, I would like to join the team." But it doesn't work when you have to drive for 1 hour, for half an hour to get there, which is very far in the Netherlands. So we used to go everywhere by bike. So what we usually say is people from Den Bosch area are welcome if they can get there by bike. Then it's then it's all right. And For the rest, it doesn't matter at all. So anybody can join.
That's really beautiful. Also makes sense with the climate goals and having a very sustainable even way of transportation through the forest. That's super
Yeah,
cool.
right. Yeah, we also try to calculate carbon sequestration, for example, and it doesn't make sense to try and sequester carbon when you're always also using or polluting while getting there. So it has to be a little bit of a balance, obviously.
Yeah, of course. And you already mentioned some herbs and chestnut, but I think everyone is curious, what what can you harvest? What do you harvest from the food forest now that it's already 6 years old, you mentioned? Because it's still not that old for a forest, but I wonder how productive it is as you yeah, as you were hoping.
Yeah, indeed. For a forest, it's not old at all. But we're happy to have quite some nice diversity of harvest. We have more than 400 different species and varieties planted on just a bit smaller than 1 hectare. So it's really super, super diverse. So there's always something to harvest. You just need to find it, and you also need to know when it's ready to harvest. So that can be the challenge. But here's some pictures just to get an idea. So last year we had a super nice grape harvest. We even made some wine. That was a whole different process. We're better with managing plants than we are with cooking.
I see.
And this is the sea buckthorn, the orange berries that are in the red crates. And on the top we have some berries, raspberries, blackberries, but also plums and different types of herbs, but also wild herbs. I must say I don't know uh, most of their English names, but there's a very sour herb, for example, and there's one that's growing in every garden, and lots of them are edible. And it was very interesting for us because since 1 year we also collaborate with the local restaurant in Den Bosch. And this guy, I put a picture up there. He's called Martin. He's really an amazing chef. He doesn't know anything about plants. I don't know anything about cooking, so we can be a great team. And in one of the first days that he was coming to the food forest to get to know it, to see what's growing there, how we can use it. He was interested. I thought he was interested in all the crazy stuff that we have, like Szechuan pepper, like sea buckthorn, um, and crazy herbs that we have. And he just came in and he was looking around, and we were walking around for an hour, and I was talking, telling him everything. And at the end, he was just pointing at a dandelion, and he said, "Oh, can I buy that one?" Well, yeah, sure, but nobody put it there. I mean, it was not really intended, but it really opened our eyes, because that natural herb layer can also be so interesting. There's so many things that we can do um, with those herbs that are just growing everywhere. We just need to know, and to know how to process them and what to make. And but right now, so indeed, you mentioned that after 6 years now, the production is, yeah, it's becoming a bit more serious. And we're also harvesting nice things, like in the picture in the middle, all the way down at the bottom, we have some green nuts, and they have almonds inside. So this is
Oh,
the outer layer of the almond. And these trees are becoming actually very productive now. So that's nice. We can also learn so much about things that we would normally never grow in the Netherlands, but actually they can grow here, and they're quite productive. So that's super interesting. We always learn new things, and every season is different.
yeah, I wanted to ask what's the variety of species that you have? Because I see most, like some of them are native, but some of them, like the almond that you mentioned, I would never expect it to grow in the Netherlands. So it's really cool that you have a very diverse, yeah, production of things. And I'm sure that it will change also with time
It
as you
does, yeah.
incorporate new
And
things. And
not
this,
everything works that we tried. So we also have apricots. Well, they didn't make it. And we
Mhm.
have peaches, and they never really give up peach. So they're surviving, but they're struggling. So it's also experimental in that sense, that we're just trying to get a little bit of experience with which trees perform well, and which maybe better we keep them in Spain and in Greece, and because they're more happy there. Yeah.
Oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah, you mentioned that some species don't uh, thrive well, and I wanted to ask, were there any challenges when you were designing or just starting up the food forest?
Yeah, so when it was planted in 2017, we had 2 super dry summers afterwards in 2018 and 2019. And that was challenging because obviously after some years you create the resilience that you want, because then the food forest becomes more dynamic and it's able um, to compensate for these stresses or shocks that it gets. So it's more resilient. It can last a bit longer when it's dry, or it doesn't suffer so much when it's really wet, like it is now in the Netherlands. It's been raining for months, really. But with healthy soils, you can really, it's okay. I mean, you're resilient. But at the time, it was not a healthy soil yet, because it still needed to regenerate, to recover a little bit. So that can be very challenging, because in those dry summers, when you don't have soil life, you don't have water holding capacity, and then trees will just die. So that was challenging, and eventually it was also necessary to make a well to be able to water the trees, because yeah, you don't want to stand there and watch them die. So that was one of the major challenges, and we see it now also in other food forests that are being planted. Well, obviously we had a very nice and wet summer this year in 2023, but last year it was also super dry. And in our food forest, because it was the 5th year, last year we could really see that it didn't need any extra water, for example, and that the herbs were still growing in the shade of the trees, whereas the grass and on the neighbor's plot was totally brown and not living anymore. So we can see some positive effects now, but definitely we've had our challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great to hear that the grass is greener on your side of the fence, at least
It is.
after some
Literally,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but as our time is coming to an end, I would love to just ask, how would I, for example, or anyone who's listening, who's tuning in, could integrate these food forest principles in their own backyard? Is it possible, or does it have to be a whole production, or is it possible to do it on a smaller scale? What do you think?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think it's definitely possible to do this on a smaller scale, because plants just love each other. They love to be planted very close to each other. So even when you have just 10 square meters, you can already try and experiment a little bit, like try to find productive trees that have different ways of growing, different shapes, and just put them there, like really close to each other, and manage them and really look at them every single day, and go to your place and check on them and see what they need, see if they need some pruning, if they need some mulching, and if they need some water, care for them. And then it's really possible already to have an apple tree with some shrubs growing underneath, with a cover crop, with some herbs in between. Also look at the wild plants that are growing everywhere. When you just have your garden and you leave it, many interesting things will already happen without you interfering. So yeah, it's definitely possible, even in a small garden, or maybe in a community garden, or something somewhere in your neighborhood. It's definitely possible to try it out. And one tip for people who want to start planting: just choose the trees that you really love. So the fruits that you love to eat, the plants that you think are so beautiful, because it's important that they make you happy, and that you really like them and start to care for them. And I think that's the most important thing when you want to start.
That's really beautiful. Thank you, Marente, and thank you so much for your time and for these beautiful slides and for a really inspiring talk.
No
I
problem, Gabby. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
All right, good luck with the food forest, and I hope the chestnut will see more than 60 or 100 years, and I'll see you then. We'll meet up.
Definitely, you're always welcome. Thank you very much.